quite clear about this as well. Describes coming out of the jhana and looking at the jhana factors. But jhana is such a hard word because it appears that it really, most importantly, just means freedom from the 5 hindrances, the nivarana.
Yes.
So that could mean many different things. The important thing to realize is that your mind has to be secluded from the 5 hindrances. And the Buddha often talked about states that seem to be very much away from them. And those would be samatha jhana. But that's not necessary. It's great, but it's not necessary.
Mm.
Because if you read
Make
like this, if you read the Satipatthana Sutta, the Buddha talks about knowing when you are angry, right? Using the nivarana, using the hindrances as an object of meditation. So it's not
mm,
so simple as people, sometimes people say, they read one sutta and they quote it to you. They say, see, this sutta says you have to do it like this. It's not so simple. Or it's not so dogmatic. People get very narrow-minded. They don't appreciate what is the important things. And they make it too much, has to be this way. Doesn't have to be that way. Not always.
yeah, I have questions. Now, because of the online teaching, so
Mhm.
many teachers,
Yeah,
so many
I
prajan,
bet.
and they teach different.
Yeah,
Some
yeah.
teach the emphasis in tukkang, Arya
Mm,
Satsi. You have to know Arya
okay.
Satsi and emphasis
Right.
in tukkang. But
Mm,
other believe in just samutaya satcha. Other believe
mhm.
in that we already have that tukkha, tukkha satcha, Arya samutaya satcha, and nirodha satcha already there. So the only thing that we have to practice is the Niro Katamini, the mark Namak
I
pad
see.
only. So it's just like many teacher approach into different route. So what do you think, Prajan?
Well, well, okay, but there's two different there's at least two different things. One is different routes.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and so there's a few things. There's more than two things. One first thing, different routes. And so absolutely, there are two. Ajahn Tong would talk about two different routes. I mean, he and our sort of our tradition, I think we we stress trying to be very orthodox. So we don't come up with our own opinions. I think we try not to. We believe that we are not. We try not to. I think some teachers may not try to. And that's the third thing I was going to say. So I'll talk about it now, I guess. Some teachers don't some teachers make things up or adapt things. And I think that's a bit of a problem. It can be a problem. You can adapt successfully, but you can also adapt in a way that you change the Buddha's teaching, right? So
Yes.
that, of course, that's different from what you're talking about, but it's there. Some of those teachers are not just teaching a different route; they're adapting, they're changing it, they're using their own teaching. We try not to do that. I don't know if we're successful. You'd have to judge for yourself, but we try not to. And so when Ajahn Tong talks about two, he's really just using a very old teaching where they say there's samatha first and then vipassana, or then there's just vipassana. It's really based on the Visuddhimagga. So, and he would call those Jeta Vimutti and Panya Vimutti. And that's a very old categorization. I mean, that's from the original text. So there is that. There are different routes, and that's okay. But the second thing I was going to say is that there's sometimes conflict where people say it has to be our way, and the way they are doing it, the way this other group is doing it, is wrong. That's different from just taking a different approach, and that is, I think, often harmful. Like, of course, people say about the tradition I follow that it's wrong, and I don't think that. That's unfortunate that people do that. But other groups that have different approaches, sure, I take a different approach. It may be faster than the way I teach. It may be slower than the way I teach. It may also, and here's the fourth thing I could say, some teachings may not ever make it to the goal. We have to leave room for that possibility. They may actually be only leading to the Brahma realms, for example, or to heaven. They may even lead in a wrong direction, but that's usually because they're not actually based on the Buddha's teaching and they've distorted it. But some teachings, I think, just teach samatha and they don't ever reach vipassana. I suspect, I actually don't know, but I think it may be the case that some, from the way it sounds. I mean, a good example of, well, also one that perverts the teaching is, I won't say examples. I probably shouldn't, but I think maybe you can think of some that we're not even sure are Buddhist. And we might have to say are not Theravada Buddhist.
I have a question. Can you hear?
I'm good at questions. Questions are my specialty.
Okay. It seems to me like, when people are meditating nowadays, they're always feeling like they have to listen to something while they meditate, as opposed to just peace and quiet and looking at what comes up and what's inside and dealing with that. It seems like listening to something is kind of more the norm now. And I was just wondering what your opinion is on that. Should a certain amount of your time be without listening and just looking inward and looking at what's coming up during your meditation while your mind is quiet and you're focused more on your body? Or is it better to maybe listen and have something guided to progress that way?
I want to say that you probably already know the answer, or you have your own idea of the answer, and I think I probably agree with you. I'm just guessing. I do want to say that many times in the Buddha's life, in the Buddha's what, teaching, he would teach excuse me, he would teach people and they would become enlightened as they were listening. Listening to the Dhamma can be a real powerful catalyst for the realization of the truth, because you're being constantly reminded of and directed. Now, with the Buddha, of course, it's different because he was very much in tune with people's states and was able to direct his teachings and adjust from moment to moment. Like, if you ever read the suttas, I think we don't appreciate this fully, that many of the teachings appear to be shifting. And some people will say, well, that maybe that was, they conjecture that it was copied wrong because suddenly he starts talking about something else. But I've seen other teachers, I do this when I teach purposefully. You change, you shift, because you see that the person's mind has shifted, and it describes this in the teaching. The Buddha would teach something and then he'd see that their mind had shifted and he would adjust accordingly. He would advance because he had already prepared them for some other teaching, so he would change. And we forget that these are not textbooks. What we read when we read the Buddha's teaching is not a textbook. It's actually a talk the Buddha gave. And so, of course, it's going to be changing, adapting. And that shows you and that reminds you of how powerful they can be, how people actually can be guided sometimes in the right direction. Now, that being said, far more often, even in the Buddha's time, people would learn what they could from the Buddha and then go off and practice on their own. The disadvantage of listening is that you're still dealing with words, concepts, and the intellectual. You have to process the teaching. So it is, I would say, technically inferior to practicing on your own.
Yeah.
It's just that we are broken, and sometimes being fixed by an outside source can be very powerful. That's all. I would say mostly you should never listen to something when you're meditating. That's really not the way to do it. But listen from time to time, and it can be a great support for your practice. It really is more to adjust your views, to adjust your understanding of the practice. It's not meant to enlighten you. Not like you can listen to talks and expect them to take the place of practice, because your mind is not engaged with reality at that time. You're engaged with processing conceptually. It's inferior. But absolutely, I mean, if you ever have had to sit through a long talk, you know how powerful it can be. The pain sometimes from sitting still, sometimes dealing with your reactions to the teaching. It can be quite powerful.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Another thing is, sorry, just as I say one last thing, is being in a group like that. Part of it is not always the teaching, but when you listen to a live talk, because you're forced to sit very still, it's like group meditation. So, I mean, there's just qualities about listening to a Dhamma talk in a Dhamma hall that can, especially when it's formal, when you've done some respect to the Buddha, you put yourself in a pretty good mindset, and then you're stuck with all these people for an hour, and it can be very good for patience and mental development. But
Yeah.
but it also very much depends on the teaching. It does require some insight. The teacher has to be poking you, has to be reminding you and correcting not just your intellectual views, but your perception. Remind you, hey, are you sitting right now? Are you, yeah. So why did the Buddha talk so much about such banal things like seeing, hearing, smelling, tasting, feeling, thinking? This wasn't meant to be an intellectual exercise. It was reminding you of what you're actually experiencing right now. Seeing, hearing, smelling. We sometimes miss that when we read the teachings. Oh, this is so simple. Why is he talking about the senses so much? Or we like it and we think of it intellectually and we start to create theories about it, and that's not what it's for. It's a reminder that, hey, this is what you're actually experiencing right now, to focus on that. So it's not all the time that a talk will head in that direction. And then it can just be entertaining or insightful in a worldly sense. So we appreciate it and it gives us some direction, and that's good. But it's never going to replace meditation. It's never going to be the kind of thing that enlightens you. Teacher
I was
really has
thinking
to
that
be.
it was good to listen to the Dhamma when you're really listening to a Dhamma talk, and then wondering if when you sit down and you try to meditate, to reflect on what you heard during the Dhamma talk, as opposed to just sitting there and listening to a Dhamma talk and thinking that you're meditating. Because a lot of times if I listen to a Dhamma talk, I don't really feel like I'm meditating. I feel more like I'm just listening to a Dhamma talk. And
Well, a
if I
lot
get
of Dhamma
something out
talks
of
are
that,
not
then
are
when I sit down to meditate, then I can kind of maybe reflect on it.
Sure. Well, two things I'd say. First is that I think it reflects the nature of a lot of talks. I mean, I've heard many talks that are not very practical, and that's not always a bad thing, but it just means those are not meant to be meditation sessions. I have heard other talks that were very much meditative, and it's kind of the thing you could meditate while you're listening. I mean, part of it is a reminder. If you ever read Mahasi Sayadaw's books, I had such a hard time reading his books because I'd start reading them and I just find myself, meditating, thinking, yeah, I know what to do. Be mindful. I just couldn't finish the book. To me, that's how great he was. But the other thing I was going to say is that don't mistake sitting and reflecting on teachings for meditation either. It's a good activity. It's a Buddhist wholesome activity, but be aware that that's still not actual meditation. The reflecting part, right? It's a type of what we would in the West call meditation, and it's a Buddhist thing to do. most important. But once you've reflected, then you understand, then you put it into practice.
Okay, thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
I have a question about when you do the Sampachanya Bappa, which you're supposed to know every movement you make, and
Yeah.
that's, to me, it needs Kanika Samadhi, the momentary concentration, rather than just sit still. So I don't know if my understanding is correct.
Yes. Yes. Kanika Samadhi. Well, there's no Vipassana without Kanika Samadhi. That's the orthodox understanding. I mean, even when you're sitting still, that's the difference between Vipassana Kammatthana and Samatha Kammatthana. Samatha Kammatthana uses Upachara and Apana Samadhi, but Vipassana uses Kanika Samadhi.
And same as when you listen to, let's say, good Dhamma talk, you follow and reflect with Yoniso Manasikan every time you understand, and then you apply to your own experience at the moment. That's still
Yeah.
using Kanika Samadhi, and also,
Right.
wouldn't you say that it's also Vipassana kind of thing? That's why a lot of people
Right.
during the Buddha time, they become enlightened.
I don't quite know what you are describing there. I'm cautious when people use the term yoniso manasikara, because to me that is just a description of mindfulness practice, but it seems to be used in a way of kind of vicharana or something like that. It doesn't actually translate to vicharana. It means literally keeping in mind with wisdom. So at yoniso manasikara and yoniso manasikara, the difference is the wisdom. But the word manasikara means keeping in mind. So when you take an object, when the mind takes an object, how is it processing that object? Is it processing that object? And it isn't even with wisdom. Yoniso doesn't actually literally mean with wisdom. What's the Thai translation of yoniso manasikara? Do you know the translation?
Similar to
Yoniso
เก็บ
Manasikara
ไว้ในใจด้วยอุบายอัน
ใส่ใจแยบ
แยบ
คาย
คาย
แยบคาย no?
Mm.
I think if I understand that correctly, it means what it actually literally means, and that's related to the origin of it, right? I don't know what
I
yebkai
don't
means,
know.
but
I mean, according to Venerable P.A. Payutto
mhm,
book, he said that
mhm.
that's one of the prerequisite in just going anywhere. You have to have a Yoniso Manasikan to begin with. I think it has related to
Yes, I
I
mean
don't want
that's
to
the point. When you
pursue.
are mindful, you have it. You have the right. And so yoni means the uterus, the womb, not the uterus, the womb. That's what the word yoni means in Pali. It means the woman's place where the fetus grows. And why they use that word is yoni so means to the origin. So when you have an object, do you go to the origin of the object, the base, the conception of the object? Because after that, there's all the things we think about it, all of the papancha, if you know that word.
Yes.
And so the yoniso is without the papancha, just to the fetus, to the root of it. What is the base? That's just the paramatta, the experience, seeing, hearing, smelling. So my understanding is that's what yoniso manasikara is. Anyway, that wasn't really related to what your question was, I don't think, but I do want to caution about thinking that reflecting has anything to do with meditation. And I think that's people say yoniso manasikara, they use the word picharana, I think, and it's not really accurate. We say it in English as well. The English translation often say Bhikkhu Bodhi. There was one translation recently that I said, well, that's not really right. And it was the kind of same idea that that's not really what the Pali says. Often the Pali uses the word asi or dasi
See,
to see, right? It
see
uses the word to
clearly.
see.
Right.
Yeah. And they translate it as understand or reflect or something like that. And it loses the meaning and they misunderstand. I think they really misunderstand it. Seeing is such a useful word because it evokes the idea of you're there, you're with it. It's not thinking, it's not intellectual. It reminds you that this isn't an intellectual exercise. This is what's happening now.
May I also ask if when in the future your course is going to open online again?
Well, I do several different things online, but I can tell you the sorts of things I do. One thing I do is, well, okay, the main thing I do is teach at-home meditation courses. And for that, it's one-on-one with individual meditators. I meet with them once a week, and I give them a new exercise once a week. It's one-on-one, and they have a slot, and we meet every week. Another thing I do is every Saturday morning we have a study group, and we read. They read the. Right now we're reading the Majjhima Nikaya, and I will help explain. And I'm looking at the Pali so I can tell them when the translation's not perfect or when I disagree with the translation. And then Saturday afternoon, I will answer questions online, sort of like this, but mostly about meditation. Monday nights, I teach at Brock University. And that's about all I do. I teach sometimes here as well. I give talks, short talks here. And then also sometimes people actually come here and practice. So October 9th, we're having another meditator come to stay here. Did that help clarify?
So every time you teach, you put on YouTube live.
Oh, and another thing I'm doing, sorry, just before I answer your question is, so just kind of answer your question is, okay, so no, what I put on YouTube is the Saturday afternoon, but also what I've started doing now is teaching from my phone again. So I have an app on my phone where I just push a button and it records my talk to our server, to our web server. And then people can go there and listen to talks. So I can give it anytime. I don't even need an audience. I like that because it's just whenever I have a chance, I'll sit down and I'll say something and then I can send people the link and it's a talk. And they've started putting those on YouTube. I just started it again. I've done 2 so far. But it was kind of like what I did in Los Angeles, same sort of thing, not so long, just any topic and then it will be on the internet. So they're putting those on YouTube as well.
Get all the
Maybe
access.
records.
All you need to do is subscribe, and that's and I get access to pretty much everything, all the new content that you're putting out.
Yeah. Yeah, you maybe saw the new 2 talks edit is, or the one anyway. She was going to maybe put up both. Sure. Sure. Easy for me is if you tell me what you want me to talk about. If you want me to give a talk, just give me a subject and I can talk about that. If I have to think up a talk, it's hard because I don't know what you need to hear. I'm not very clever at figuring out what you need to hear. Yeah, this hour is good. It's 9 p.m. here. Yeah, anytime after 5 p.m. your time, I'm free. Usually, almost always. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, that's good. Mhm. Mm. Mhm. Absolutely. Mhm.
Yes. I'm just going to
Yes.
be
I
teaching
don't have
teaching for
any
Tom.
idea on that quite yet, but I could probably, with Marin and the rest of the group, come up with something. Marin, do you have something specific?
Mm.
Hmm. Hmm. Mhm. Yeah, the easiest is if you have questions, I can answer your questions. That's easy because the audience often changes, right? You don't know who's going to come one week, next week. So when people come, if they have questions, if they have something they want me to talk about, then I can answer people's questions. The easiest for me is always answering questions, because then I know exactly what to talk about.
Mhm.
Sure, sure. You just tell me next week. You say you ask me a question next week, and I'll talk. I'll talk about it.
Oh.
I can
Yeah,
also
it's
teach in
late
Thai.
for
It doesn't have to be English.
Mm. Okay.
Don't want to scare away the Thai people. Okay.
Mhm.
Mm.
No.
No, no, that's it.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you all.
Thank
It's
you
good to hear
very
your
much.
voices again. Thank you for inviting me.
Thank you so much.
Have a good night. Abhivadana Siddhisa Nityang Uddhapachayino Tattaro Dhamma Vadanti Ayuvanno Sukhang Palang.
Satu.
Uh,
Satu.